Welcome, everybody. I'm going to quickly hand over to Harrison to do a little brief introduction.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kuldip. So, yes, welcome everybody to our webinar this afternoon, titled A Generation Interrupted and the Great Need for Digital Transformation. I want to firstly start with an introduction for myself and for Real Staffing, and then I can hand over with Kuldip and Steve. Perfect. Lovely. So, as you can see, it's me there, Harrison Southworth Knight. So I'm a recruitment consultant at Real Staffing. I've got some information there for you. So we've been recruiting into the higher education sector for over a decade now. We're working with 90% of the universities across the UK and Ireland, and some of our biggest clients are included in there. For example, University of Manchester, Kent, LSE, Imperial College London as well. And this is just to name a few. We've got a team of 14 market specialist consultants on our education team, but this has now been increased to 19. We've now recently merged with Computer Futures as well. However, we will be covering the same areas of student systems and VLE, IT infrastructure, project management and business change, academic services, HR, finance, payroll systems, marketing, digital and web development, as well as BI and data warehousing. So each of these areas will have interim solutions that are readily available to create an impact on any organization or institute that they join. So within their market is my area of project management and business change. So the typical roles for me that I'll be recruiting will be IT directors, program project managers, continuous improvement managers, BAs, change managers, PMO managers as well. And just to give you some facts about us, we're an official member of UCISA. Our team attends annual conferences across the UK. Fortunately, haven't been so lucky this year. We've also placed over 1,000 contractors with universities, colleges and education partners across the UK and Ireland. We're also registered to the G Cloud and CCS frameworks. And just to give a bit on myself personally, my main success on the team is due to the sort of the relationships I like to build with my clients, whether that be new or existing. I'm ensuring to regularly check in on contractors that I've got there, let them know about market movements and providing insight whenever necessary, even if it's to check in for your weekend plans and what you've been getting up to. And this is proven with 80% of my placements made in the past year due to repeated business. So if you had any questions for the above, anything you wanted to ask, feel free to send me an email or contact me through LinkedIn as well. And now I'd like to hand over, give a very 2020 introduction to Kuldip and Steve. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harrison. Just going to do a quick admin. We are recording this webinar. Two reasons for that. One, it allows us to look back and see where we could improve on our presentation. And secondly, for those who aren't able to join, we can share the recording and they can consume it at their own leisure. We actively encourage everybody to raise questions as we go along. The chat function is available there for you to do that. Myself and Steve will and Harrison will be looking at that chat function to see if there's any burning questions, and we will try to address them in the Q&A section at the end of the webinar. You will be on mute, and we kindly ask you to also put your videos off, so that helps with the bandwidth. The agenda for today is I'm going to introduce myself and I'll hand over to Steve to do that as well. I'm going to put a little bit of context around HE in terms of it as a sector and some of the institutions that work in it. And then I'm going to look at some of the trends that I've seen in HE and especially in relation to digital transformation and business technology trends. And I'm going to then sort of look at some of the challenges and opportunities that the impact of COVID-19 has had on the sector, and rather than dwell on the kind of challenges, how those can really be realized through opportunities. And we'll then move into one of the key challenges we've always seen in many organizations, irrespective of the sector, is how you bring about change. And I'm delighted to have Steve Riley from the University of Cambridge with me, who's going to be sharing his experience and insights as we go along. We have some interactive polls for you as well, because we'd like to hear from you. We'd like to get your insights. And then we're also going to be sharing a little bit around an organizational change blueprint, very high level. And I'll ask Steve and myself, we'll give you some final thoughts on where we think the sector's going post the pandemic, and also then try to address any of the questions you might have. So just a little bit about me. I've been IT transformation change leader for, it seems like 20, 25 years. I have significant business and IT experience. As you can see, I've worked with a number of public and private sector organizations, and I fell in love with higher education somewhere around 2013 when I started working at the University of London International Academy, and they're a distance learning provider. And then I had a pleasure a few years later to go and work at the University of Cambridge, and then following on with an interim role at Durham University. And since then, as you can see there, some interim roles at Wakefield District Council, and most recently the Excel Convention Centre. I am the managing director of a company that I set up something like 4 or 5 years ago now, called Innovative Quality Solutions, and my whole premise is about solving digital and IT transformation problems. And I have a real people focus around me in terms of making that transformation agenda work for the organization. It gives me great pleasure to now hand over to Steve to introduce himself.
So good afternoon, everybody from Cambridge, where it did start out rather nice, but it's gone rather dark since we started this seminar. So my name's Steve Riley. I have done 40 years in government IT. I ended up as the acting CIO for 18 months in the DWP. That's a big old department. It's got about 85,000 employees when I was there, and 22 million customers. I think there'll be a few more customers after the last 6 months events, and that was processing about 170 billion pound a year in benefits. So I did that for a large number of years. I've got experience, which we'll probably touch on later on, of creation of agencies, bringing back from agencies into departments, outsourcing, insourcing, and some major welfare reform projects that I worked on. And 5 years ago, I joined Cambridge University as the Chief Operating Officer for IT. So I worked to an academic, and that's been a completely different change for me, and I'll hopefully cover some of that for you. So, the university, I'll explain, has been through these last 6 months and what we've done and how we've responded to that. We'll try and cover that, and happy to answer any questions in the end. And thank you for taking the time to join, to listen.
Yeah, absolutely. We really do appreciate the time that you've taken out of your calendars to come and join us and listen to us, and as we share our experiences. Without further ado, I'm going to shift into a little bit of an overview of higher education. This is not comprehensive, but this is just some of the things that stood out for me when I started working in higher education. First thing to realize, it's a major contributor to the UK economy. If you think about its turnover, if you combine the legal sector turnover and the marketing and advertising sectors, the university sector generates more turnover than both of those sectors combined together. So significant £1 billion of turnover. There are 2/3 of UK higher education institutions have incomes of over 100 million. So if you think about it, there's something like about 125 to 30 UK universities. A lot of them were the old polys. So in 1992, a lot of the old polys became universities, and hence the numbers increased. Just over a quarter of those institutions have 20,000 students and above. I think Cambridge is up to 35,000, Steve, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Manchester University has close to 40,000, Newcastle 30,000, and they consist of postgraduates, undergraduates, academic staff, professional services, in a very federated and devolved model. And a lot of the income that the universities generate are from student fees. I think the last time I looked at the figures, 55% of income is generated from student fees, and that's been quite a shift. If you're paying fees, the student now expects an experience, expects a service, and therefore the sector has been going through significant change beyond before COVID around how you enhance that student experience. And just to the final point around HE is that a lot of the universities are major research, have major research departments, and they, innovate. They create products and services that foster significant innovation. And we're in the midst of a second wave of a pandemic, and if you think about how quickly universities, Imperial College, Oxford and Cambridge and others universities that have been liaising and collaborating with the private sector to develop vaccines, that just shows you how powerful that intellectual IP is in generating not only value but helping protecting people as in the economy. And I always like this quote. I always like that, universities are the bastions of the future leaders of our nation, and we should never fail them. So it's always important to think of that. So that's just a quick sector overview. Two things that have stood out to me as I was doing some research for this webinar. The first one is that if you can see on the left-hand side, the number of universities that have significantly gone through major financial challenges. The number of universities have quadrupled over the last 4 years who have now gone into deficit. And so that's a significant figure. And that's important to note because some of these smaller universities really do rely on those student incomes and fees and the research funding that they get. So it's important to recognize that as a challenge. But on the upside, if you see on the right-hand side, there's a massive gap. There's a 50% gap to fill in the next 10 years to get to the demands. As you can see, it says that this is some research that was done by Angel Calderon on the massification of higher education. And he's saying that there's going to be a doubling of demand for higher education enrollments going forward. So a massive opportunities and also challenges. And over the last 6 to 8 months, as we've been as organizations or businesses or institutions have been dealing with the pandemic, universities have really been moving a lot of their organizational delivery model to an online delivery model. And I just wanted to give you a little quote there from David McQuire, who's the interim principal and vice chancellor at the University of Dundee. And he said, as a result of the pandemic, we have effectively been working up the delivery of a 5-year digital strategy in 6 months. And that's a significant statement. And we'll be hearing from Steve about what they did at Cambridge, which kind of reflects some of that quote there. Just a little bit more data to set more context around digital and change. I think it's important to recognize, we just look at, this is Gartner data that just came out a couple of months ago, and they surveyed senior business and IT leaders. And what you can see on the left-hand side is a lot of the data says that investment has really moved into accelerating digital business initiatives. And as you can see with the orange bars, there's been a focus of investment in technology-based digital initiatives that give operational excellence, and a focus on how technology and those digital initiatives can actually drive cost optimization. So there's a couple of things going on there. There's a drive for digital to enable products and services to deliver quicker, faster, better in a hybrid delivery kind of model, but then also how we can use digital to reduce cost. So it's a kind of a service improvement and a cost driver. And also on the right-hand side, you can see some of the budgetary changes that we're likely to see over the next 12 months and beyond. And you can see the technology spend. I just a word of caution that technology spend is not going to happen across all sectors, because some sectors have been disproportionately being affected by the pandemic. But in general, you can see a lot of investment in technologies, and I think there's going to be a massive upsurge in M&A and divestitures, corporate restructuring on the cost side as well, which then really allows me to kind of move into the main area of the webinar, which were one of those challenges that HE institutions are facing, and more importantly, what are those opportunities? So I've got 5 areas that I've drawn out, and these are not exhaustive, but certainly, hopefully they will resonate with some of the audience that are on here. So the first one is around protecting revenue. Universities deliver academic courses to undergraduates, postgraduates, and at distance learning. And I think the pandemic has really forced universities to really strengthen those propositions. But also, how do we go about diversifying that academic portfolio to make up for potential losses in student numbers? So in some cases, some universities have had a dip in admissions, whilst there have been increases on older people, but some of the younger student population numbers have stayed pretty stable. There's been a minor decrease. And I think there's a challenge in how universities continue to diversify and attract students at an international level, and maybe there's new geographies that they go through. When I was at Durham University, for example, we had centres in Malaysia, Singapore, and other countries. Maybe universities need to be thinking of other regions and countries, and maybe even nearshoring it. Second area is those cost sides. The cost side, the chief financial officers at universities have been sharpening their pencils. The pandemic has given them or has forced them to really think about how they can reduce non-core spend and focus on things that are going to really differentiate them in the future. I think some of the digital solutions that we'll be talking about will really help in that vein. The third area is as we come out of the pandemic and making sure businesses and institutions were operationally secure and embedded business resilience, and the operational sides were fine, there's now a need to move into a more strategic look at what the university of the future would look like. And so this third area is about looking at taking time to reflect on how well the organization and institution did in terms of coming out of COVID-19, but now thinking about how the bigger picture, what is the corporate HE strategy, and what do they need to do in terms of developing new skills, capabilities, partnerships with industry, as well as I mentioned earlier, the new cohorts and international students, as well as new courses maybe that can attract distance learning for mature students, for example. The fourth area, without a shadow of a doubt, which is my kind of focus area in terms of my subject matter expertise, has really been around how you move courses online. So it's not just the courses for students, but also how can you do admissions? How do you strengthen the proposition for marketeers so that you get the admissions right for students? How do we move content so that lectures are available seamlessly? How do we do examinations using technology, secure technology at a distance? And how do we do graduations? A lot of graduations happened at a distance during July and this year. And I think we need to really think about how universities are going to be now delivering that learning pedagogical model, and particularly the deep expertise that lecturers have in a synchronous and asynchronous way in that delivery, in that blended model of what somebody coined a phrase to me the other day of clicks versus bricks. How much is going to be on premise? How much is going to be done at a distance? And making sure that the student experience is maintained. And the student's experience is a real challenge when you're on campus or in a hall and you're being in lockdown, and how do you manage that experience or enhance that experience so that you know, you're dealing with one of the other areas that I'll come on to is student well-being. And I think that move, and we'll be drawing on Steve's experience here, that move to remote working, that was done in a real agile way. And that was a real adaptive digital model for delivery of IT services. And there's so much learning. And again, we'll be drawing on Steve's experience around what they learned at Cambridge as they moved to that remote working, and what is that agile model look like? How do we capture that, learn, and then continue to apply the focus we need to? And as I said, there was 5 areas, and the 5th one, which is so important, is the ensuring that the health and well-being of students and staff. I'd say students and staff, because staff have been affected by this. How do we ensure that we have the right support people in place to support students and staff through a period of significant unrest and challenging environment? If you've been watching the news, there's been a number of students at Manchester University that have been highly stressed in their dorms. In fact, it actually led to a fatality. So there's some real challenges and opportunities to focus on employee and staff well-being. I'm going to bring in Steve at this stage to get Steve to share his thoughts on one or many of these areas, and in relation to what you've seen over the last few months, Steve.
Thanks, Kuldip. So I'd like to just concentrate on 4 and 5, and then maybe there's questions I can touch on 1, 2, and 3. But in terms of 4, first of all, so if I go back now to January, we were all sat in Cambridge with what we were going to do over the next 12 months. None of the things I'm currently going to talk about were actually, did we have a plan for delivery. We had some thoughts about we were going to do some of it. We had a pilot running in one of the areas which I'll touch on. We didn't have a real plan to do any of these things. And then come the lockdown, we were suddenly faced with, you know, how are we going to communicate with one another, given that we're all now being sent home and working remotely. So we've got a Microsoft agreement for education that comes with Teams, and we've rolled out Teams, and that's what everybody is now using for communicating amongst teams at the university. That's administrative, and the schools and the colleges are using the Microsoft sort of tendency with that. Now, that we were thinking about that. There were lots of debates about, you know, how we write policies for teams, and so people don't use inappropriate language, etc. And lots of concerns that when you went into action to deliver it, suddenly evaporated. These things didn't seem as important as they did when everybody was debating them. And cover this later on, but that sort of, you know, having to do these things causes a sort of different set of concerns that you might have had, you know, before about that. So let's get something in terms of teams out there. We were running a very small pilot on lectures online with a couple of schools wanting to do that, but nothing very serious. And we had to make that basically, the university wanted all of its lectures online because most of our accommodation and you know, lecture theatres are Victorian in nature and aren't very good for social distancing. I don't think it was something the Victorians went in for, you know, that was something that asked for. So we accelerated our, you know, solution that we had for lecture capture, and have rolled that out for people. And basically we've rolled that out to studios. So we've created a number of studios in the university where people can go and have their lecture recorded, and then it goes into the virtual learning environment, and therefore people can use that. Again, there was a lot of things about, how will this happen? How long will we keep things? What editing will take place and everything? And these were all being done in this like pilot environment. As soon as you say you've got to do it, all of those things become less important, more focused, and people moved quickly on that. And we've delivered on that as well. The third challenge was about examinations. So all our examinations traditionally done in the aforesaid grand rooms with invigilators and all the rest of it. We went completely online with that, using Moodle to create those exams and for those exams to be taken. All of the exams in the university were done like that, with some innovation around capturing some of the materials that people were expected to produce. But that was a big effort by a team that had never really attempted anything of this sort of size and scale before to actually get that done. And working with the exams people, they were able to ensure that all of the exams were then completed, remotely using Moodle. And I thought that was a very impressive sort of undertaking that the teams did, and that then enabled us to do remote graduation. So we still had people in the Senate House, awarding degrees in absentia. The next thing we had to think about was digital admissions. So the university here interviews all of its candidates for posts, for applications. So we have gone, we had to do that. We've done that using Teams and a number of other technologies to put something together where people can either go to a centre or from their own home, go through the interview process in an electronic and digital way. So that was the sort of fourth area that we had to respond very quickly to. Again, that we had no concept when we started the year. That wasn't anywhere where we had any sort of plans to do anything like that. It was traditional. This university's been going for a long time. There's a lot of tradition about how you did these interviews and on what days they're done and what time they're done and who does them and where they're done, etc. So we moved very quickly on digital admissions. The last place was in our high performance computing teams, where there was now a demand to say we want, for obvious reasons, that we now want to be able to securely store patient data. So we had to move quickly on that one as well to get that, ISO certification, so people can use that environment for storing patient data. And there's been a lot of work done in this university about tracking the pandemic, etc. So there were sort of 5 areas there where people had to respond. And the main point I'm trying to make is not about the technologies, it's about having to do things and the change that makes in people, as opposed to when you've got time to do it, the whole approach becomes very different, and things that appeared difficult and were concerning people suddenly became things that weren't that difficult to overcome, and decisions can be made quickly if the university is determined to do that. So there was not very little of, this is an IT problem, you better sort it out. There was very little problem for us about, we need to do that together. And all of those 5 areas I talked about were really substantial, collaboration between the IT people and the business people in getting that done. There was a lot of agile working. There was a lot of, trial. There was a lot of, let's get a minimum viable product out there and all these sorts of things, which maybe we can talk about later on. So in terms of 5, then that was more interesting. So So in terms of staff welfare, that's been really important for us. And I suppose what I'd say is that in that we've tried to say that everybody is making their own journey on this. Okay, there's a tendency with this thing to believe that for us to immediately categorize people who would be having difficulty working from home and put them into a thing that goes, people with children will have difficulty working from home, people caring for somebody who's shielding have something to do. And I think what's become apparent is that all of the staff are on a different journey for this thing. Some people have found it really difficult because their only source of human interaction has been in work. That's no longer been available to them. During the first lockdown, we really tried with a very small number of people to enable them to come into work, safely, because they really were finding it very, very stressful being at home on their own because there was no sort of social interaction. And we've tried to deal with everybody's journey. People, with kids who were sent home, and tried to be really accommodating of that, and being really clear that we didn't plan this. If people are coping with different ways of working with that, they weren't going to be as productive as we were, and just accepting that. We've had weekly meetings with all of the staff where we sort of go through, we sort of present something, the senior leadership team joins that, and that's maintained really good figures of upwards of between 75% and 85% of people have attended that on a regular basis around, and that's helped, I think, bring the whole sort of thing about. It's much more of a joint venture. There's a lot less of the sort of that's management's problem and not mine. Maybe cover that a bit later on. We've introduced in IT, some mental health first aiders who we trained online, and have introduced those to try and help people with who've been suffering during this period. For students, we have done a lot around improving their, the resilience of the network and the network access, and trying to make sure, because that's obviously very important, that if you're isolated, then, we build some resilience into that. Excuse me. We've done asymptomatic testing now since the start of the term. Every student in university accommodation has been tested, every week. So these were things that, the main point I'm trying to make here is these are the things that weren't being done here. They were being done outside of here. They were being done in, in other places I'd worked. I'd seen, speed at work. It wasn't really what was done here. And I'd say that's the main point out of these things. There was nothing technologically very difficult about what we did. I don't think we, it was all about trying to deploy things that were, available to us at speed, and how you govern that and how you deal with that in this sort of crisis. We try and cover later on when we talk about, the type of transformation that we're doing. The university has a lot of technical debt, is suffering a lot of a lack of investment in terms of IT.
Okay, thank you, Steve, for that. I've seen a couple of questions up on the board, and we'll try to address those as we go along. It might be, Steve, you might want to have a quick think about the questions. Yeah. Just wanted to kind of pull this together a little bit. I think to summarize this part of the presentation, there's 6 things I think that are going to be really important for university leaders to focus on. I think Steve already has talked about that digital learning piece. He also mentioned the screening areas for digital assessment, We've mentioned student recruitment being key and how you enhance your offerings. We talked about student staff well-being, and obviously revenue diversification. A lot of revenue from universities are done from conferences and events. There's going to be a lot of that missing. How are we going to readdress that? And the final one is we've got to students that come out of university have got to be employable. We're going to go into a recession, and how do we go help students who come out of university with a degree to differentiate themselves, and how can we enhance their employability? I think there's something there around um, digitizing and digital skills and upskilling students so that they can become more entrepreneurial. And there's all sorts of thoughts. Steve, I just wanted to get your view on is there anything missing from here, and how does this work in reality? Is this something that Cambridge will be going forward with?
Yes, I think that all of those need to be considered together when you're making some of these decisions. So I think there's a danger in these things that you pick one of those. If you think about those things as, you know, as muscles, and you can overdevelop some of these things, put a lot of effort into digital learning, and then not do a lot around digital assessment. Talked about that in terms of revenue diversification. All of those things all need to be considered together. So you do need to develop these things against a plan. And I think we'll come on to say a bit more about that in the next couple of slides.
Thank you, Steve. We're going to shift tact a little bit. To do all these initiatives requires a significant, not only investment, but also a way of working and getting or reaching outcomes. And one of the areas that I've been talking to Steve about prior to this webinar was how do we make change happen? And I was really happy to hear Steve's word about we didn't have a plan, but we had to coalesce. People had to come together. People had to work in an agile way. People got stuff done. And I wanted to now move to how transformation works and some of our experiences. And again, I will be drawing upon Steve, but just let me just show you this graph. My experiences around transformational change, and maybe this kind of maybe address some of Peter's questions, is that universities are traditionally have been known for doing change at a very small pace, and it's been highly governed, big governance structures, lots of policies and processes, and moving at the pace that they see fit. But I think that is changing. One, the need, technology and the adoption of technology and institutions and enhancing the student experience around that is a major driver. I think competition across universities is increasing, but how do we bring about that change? And I've seen two types of changes. One where you've got the big bang approach, where people go for this S curve, where there's this heightened enthusiasm of change, and a new leader comes in, and everybody's going to kind of focus on thinking about roles and structures, and then what happens is it fails to deliver initially, and they go into this trough of delusionment, which is between T1 and T2. And that kind of really doesn't enhance the morale and the competency of the organization. Because when you're going through a transformational change, what people are really going through is they're learning and unlearning. So they're learning new ways of working because there's a different way of delivering products and services and offerings. And people need to be given that time. And if you get stuck in this trough of delusionment, you turn people off. There's no emotional attachment, and it takes a monumental effort to bring them back up and give the benefits. What has emerged in certainly my experiences now is this a move to more incremental, agile improvements. So doing bite-sized chunks, doing a proof of concept, creating a minimal viable product, getting people to coalesce around a problem, giving them the empowerment to go and fix the problem with a purpose, and giving them resources, and then incrementally building on it. Hence the agile way, the zagged line that you see there. And Steve, I wanted, rather than me talking about it and my experiences, I wanted to get your 40+ years of experiencing change across the public sector, see what you think's worked well, and does any of this resonate for you?
Okay, so sometimes it's difficult to not sound like your dad, but I got to try and talk to you about. So I have been involved in several of these transformational projects. I'll come to Cambridge last. So, you know, the creation of agencies in government was a big change. Big department, let's create agencies that will different customer groups. I dealt with them bringing agencies back in when they said that hadn't quite worked, and let's make agencies. Did outsourcing, major outsourcing of contracts in DWP IT, and then a resulting of that being subsequently insourced again as I was leaving. And, you know, I then joined this university. Now, this university had spent 2 years deciding it was a good idea to merge some IT groups together. Basically, some people who provided, you know, university type services, and people who developed, who had been managing and running administrative services, along with high performance computing. So all of those three things brought together, and we had a plan and a, you know, a big sort of bang approach going to do this. Everybody was going to be interviewed and before they got the job, etc., etc. All those other things I've talked about had the same characteristics of this. So when I got here, I found that, you know, people are pretty much now exhausted by this, and we haven't even started. Okay, so I've had a lot of conversation about it. There's been all of this, you know, people having their say about this change is going to come, and now we get into the, you know, HR element of this and creating teams and everything. So the result of that for me is always that everything gets coupled to the slowest carriage. So everything is slowed down by the slowest thing. You tend to inhibit teams who could get on and start changing things because they're waiting for everybody to be ready to do this. You end up with these HR issues being really very, very difficult to do and do successfully. So a lot of people sort of switch off. And I have found that, you know, since we altered that to, because it wasn't working, because it was just causing a lot of strain, to this much more incremental improvement of lots of, you know, change that we needed to do, tackling a piece at a time, making sure that we understood where we were going. So this isn't about not having a destination. This is about, you know, getting on the bus and making some journey towards where you're trying to get to, readjusting as you need to, being able to meet with the demands. I think it's, you know, I think if you think about the rate of change that occurs, to be talking about something, you know, in that transformation that's going to take 3 years, you know, to appear, it's very difficult for people now to sort of conceive that. It seems like a long time away to do things, given the rate of change that we're not just in, you know, in what we're doing, but in our own lives. The rate of change is very rapid. The rate of social change is very rapid. And to talk about these things in such a long term, I just find people finding it more and more difficult to get their head around it. They want to know all the answers to everything. I don't think you have all the answers to everything when you start these things. You uncover things, and that sort of much more of an incremental approach lets you deal with that. It lets you adjust your strategy on a regular basis about, are you still going in the right direction? It makes you think all the time about whether you're doing the right thing. It much more empowers teams to get on with things. I think that, you know, having the teams, you know, has enabled us to do those other things. As I say, there's nothing, you know, fancy from a technology point of view. It's just about getting it done. and the governance around that is a lot better. I've gone from not having to write lots of papers for boards, for being able to turn up and talk about what we're actually doing and talk about the deliveries we're doing rather than what you might get. I also think importantly that you need that now. So if you take that the big bang approach, you tend to spend a lot of money on it. You then sort of run out of money and go and ask them for more money, and you've got nothing to show for the money you've got. If you take the first, that second incremental approach, people can see the value you're delivering, your ongoing delivery. It makes those investment discussions, I think, far easier.
Thank you, Steve. I think what we'll do is get a little bit of the audience participation on these change models. So just bear with me as I switch over to our first interactive poll. So what I'd love everybody to do is, in your organization, institution, or business that you work at the moment, what we'd love to do is to see which organizational change method would your organization favor. Is it the Big Bang? Is it the incremental agile, or one or two, the other, one of each, or a bit of each, or none of the above? And the best way to do this is that we're using Slido. So as long as you've got internet connection on your laptop or your desktop or on your mobile device, there's a little barcode there. If you, with your camera, go to the barcode, it will take you straight to slido.com, and you can put in the code, which is #69387. And please vote for which change method would your organization or institution favor to bring about the transformational change that we've been describing.
I was going to say, it's a bit like an easy way to sort of describe as well, like sort of the track and trace. If you have been anywhere, if you open the camera and just scan it, hold it straight up to the barcode, and it'll take you directly to the website.
We will give people some time to do this because we've got some votes coming through.
Yeah, they'll come through, yeah.
Please do continue to vote. We will give you time. Great. We'll give it another 10 seconds. If you are a consultant and you've been working with a number of clients, maybe you can tell us which of your clients would favor which method. And okay, so Steve, we have a combination. The interesting thing is nobody's voted for Big Bang, which is really insightful. Having done a Big Bang transformation and seeing the challenges it brings, it is interesting nobody's voted for that. Everybody, there's 40% landed on the incremental, 36% on agile iterative, and some have said a combination of two. So that's interesting as well. In some cases, you might want to be doing Big Bang because you can drive something through, or it's something else, or then incremental at the same time. Interesting. Steve, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, so I think there are elements, you certainly need elements of the Big Bang to do that incremental agile. Mm-hmm. You need to know where you're going. You need to know what you're trying to do. So that sort of visionary thing is certainly necessary. And, but that, I think that's very different from, and we're going to lay out a path for everything we're going to do to get there now today. which is the way I would describe the Big Bang approach. And you
Yeah.
don't know what you don't know. And that's where I think these things,
You're absolutely right, Stephen. I think,
difficult.
yeah, it's setting the vision and the direction sometimes needs a big bang. And I just picked up Peter's comment, who I think is saying the same thing, which is right. I think, in my view, that's what I've seen. You need to set the direction, and sometimes you need to get that direction set up relatively quickly, and requires a little bit of more of a push rather than a pull. And then you can get people to coalesce on outcomes rather than process and governance. Absolutely. Okay, I'm just going to stop sharing that and just see where we are on the presentation. And apologies for that. So can you see my slides again, Steve?
Yeah.
Yeah, all there.
Okay, we've done the big bang. So poll number 2, folks, we think that there's 3 types of organizations or institutions that are merging as a consequence of the pandemic. We think there's an organization A, which is the protector organization, where they furloughed their staff. As soon as the vaccine kicks in, they're going to bring everybody back. They're not going to go to remote working. The customer service is poor, the IVR is not working, they're protecting revenue, and they're not really liaising and working with their customers. There's the frozen organization B, who is got his head in the sand, is about to disappear or has disappeared, and then the organization C, which is the galvanized organization. This is the one that has realized it needs to adapt quickly. I'm going to use that word pivot. It's changing. It needs to think about how it can bring in agility in his organization. It needs to think about its customers, its communities, its colleagues, and is rapidly changing and building solutions to meet that for the future. And what we'd like you to do is tell us, what is your institution? Is it an A, is it a B, or is it a C? Or is it a combination of A and C? So I'm going to switch back to the polls. Stay where you are in Slido, because you'll be able to see this poll in Slido as well. So back into Slido, stay in there in your login. You've got your barcode, you've got the code there. Which one are you? Are you an A? Remember, B is the one who's frozen, A is the one who's a protector, C is the one who's galvanized, is going to change, it needs to change, it needs to adapt, is bringing in an innovation, and wants to think about its new operating model. Please vote, and we will give you some time. So it's interesting to see which one your organization, or if you're a consultant, it'll be interesting to know which of your clients, which model are they moving towards. And thank you for your comment, Louise. We are absolutely talking about a mindset change, and it's not about technology. This is about being adaptive. Absolutely right. And Peter, you're absolutely right. Continually innovating and moving forward, not looking backwards, is absolutely right. And thinking about new initiatives. Yes, it is a mindset change. Thank you for that. That's absolutely what we are talking about. Steve, do you want to comment on this? Everybody's, which is what I thought, 60% would be close to the galvanized organizational institution going forward. Any comments?
I think I would say that there has been a significant mindset. I think that, my job and the job of the IT people now is to make sure there's choice. So to the point that some people are making in the chat around, will we revert back? If you take something like, admissions, it's like, is that not a good thing that you've got choice now? You can bring people down here. That might be difficult for some people. you could offer them the alternative. And so I think that's what I've seen, a significant mindset change here. And I think it's all about choice, and how you manage that choice is going to be the thing. I think we in IT have failed if this reverts back to what we had before, because we should be talking about giving people choice about the way they do things. And I think, in some of this thing, I've tried to avoid this, everything looking like a nail, okay, and you just hit it with a digital hammer. It's like you have to offer flexibility around that, and I think that's really where the change in mindset will really kick in. It's this thing of, you don't need to do everything in this one way. You've now got some choices about the way you choose to do this. You can vary the groups of people. For some people, attending interviews here, it may be really difficult. And that might be a better option to view that, in the pandemic. After the pandemic, the point that somebody's made earlier on about, that is a big, part of, Russell Group University, is that, you're mixing with other people, and, I suppose it's the same with everywhere, but particularly, this sort of thing of, mixing with, clever people, and in your lectures and in your tutorials and all the rest of it is key. But again, that's something that, I think people will see the benefits of, that, capturing lectures and having them for people to look at them, post lecture, to help them revise and all these sorts of things. So I think it's very much now about choice rather than this one single thing. And I think that is the big mind shift that I think we shouldn't let this go back to. Maybe it's right to do some continuing to do exams remotely and online with people. Why not have that as a choice? But we're going from, choice to choice from, we've always done it in that room on that day for that tripos, etc. So it's a big leap as well. I'm trying to. So.
Yeah, I'm conscious of time. It's gone past 2 o'clock, and we've addressed some of the questions. I'm just wondering if there's any burning questions that we haven't answered, and we can carry on if people are okay to.
Yeah, cool. I was going to say, I don't know if there was any at the end that you wanted to answer. It was from the top. Just try and find it.
Can I just mention it, because I think Darren's raised a good point there, right? That has been a major change here that I should have talked about. There was very much here about, this is an IT problem, you need to solve this. I think this has forced people to work together to get these answers. There is no change capability in the university. They don't have a change team. They don't have but I think all these things will start to, that will be a significant change for them when they really think about how they've got to adapt to doing ongoing change and having some sort of capability in this.
Yeah, and I absolutely would echo that, Steve. I think the impetus or the driver from COVID-19, so we had to do stuff, and that it wasn't a case of a mandate. It was a COVID-19 mandate. We've got to shift to remote working. We've got to do things and crack on with them. And people coalesced in groups and teams around a problem or a challenge. And they did that in an agile way. And that adaptive way is what we've been trying to bring across, is that change, you need purpose, you need a direction and a strategy. And if people have that emotional attachment to that strategy and that vision, they can adaptively, incrementally bring about change. People can do that in their organization as long as you empower them. If they get empowered, you empower them and you give them the permission to go and work in this agile kind of way. And that's the message that we're trying to bring across. And that requires a significant mindset shift right from the top of the organization down to the bottom. And that's what I think the message that I certainly have been trying to bring across in this webinar with Steve. Is there any other questions that we need to pick up on? Taylor, Harrison, have you?
Yeah, I'm just trying to say there was one from the top from Peter, but I think he's gone now.
Okay.
Looking for, I think the majority of them just been answered as we're kind of going forward through it as well.
Okay. We have some other I heard somebody there.
I thought, yeah, I was going to say, I think somebody's just not on mute there.
Yeah. So what I'll do is we have some of the content, but I'm just conscious of the time and we're well over the 2 o'clock. We've answered some of the questions. If we bring it to a close then, and we can probably very happy to schedule a follow-on to talk about some of the other aspects that, that this draws out.
Yeah,
I'm happy to chat with, you've got my details on this. I'm more than happy to, if people have found it useful, to share some further insights if people.
Yeah, absolutely. We will we will have the recording available for everybody, and what we'll be we'll share that with everybody so they can contact us and talk to us if they've got any further questions. But with that said, we'll bring the webinar to a close.
Yeah, so we've got some thank yous coming in as well, that it was interesting. It would be good to further explore around that as well. So maybe kind of a bit of a part 2 would be a good idea. So I think for myself as well, thank you to everybody for taking the time out today as well, just before, as we said, with the Christmas break to put this in your calendar. So thank you very much for attending and getting the questions over. Thank
you very much. And we will follow up with a part 2 to take talk a little bit more about some of those frameworks that we've got. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.